She smiled at me like she knew all my secrets, and warned me I was dangerous to myself when I didn't even know what I wanted. The afternoon sun spilled softly through the tall windows of the small, cozy bookstore, dust motes dancing in the warm light. I was wandering the aisles aimlessly, running my fingers along the spines of novels I'd never read, when I noticed her. She was standing near the poetry section, a quiet presence that seemed to command attention without trying. She was older than me, yes, maybe in her early 40s, but her grace, her quiet confidence, drew the eye the way sunlight draws a moth. Her hair, dark with streaks of silver catching the light, fell loosely around her shoulders. She tilted her head slightly as she read the back cover of a worn book, lips curved in a subtle smile that suggested amusement or perhaps a private thought she wasn't sharing. I found myself watching her longer than I should, captivated by the ease in her posture and the way she seemed entirely present in that small moment. She noticed me, eventually, and our eyes met. There was a spark there, though, subtle, curiosity, maybe a recognition of a kindred energy. I shifted awkwardly, pretending to study a shelf of travel guides, but my gaze kept drifting back. That's when she spoke, her voice smooth, confident, carrying just enough warmth to make it feel like she was letting me in on a secret. "You seem dangerously indecisive," she said, tilting her head slightly, her eyes twinkling. "Not sure whether you want that book, or just to look like you do." I chuckled, a little embarrassed, but there was something in her tone that felt teasing, playful, but not condescending. I stepped closer, keeping the distance respectful, but drawn to her energy. She didn't flinch. Instead, she offered a small smile that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. When I reached for the same poetry book she had just set down, our hands brushed lightly. A fleeting contact, nothing more than a whisper of skin against skin, but enough to make me notice the warmth of her touch, the softness of her skin. My heart skipped, subtle but undeniable, and I felt the sudden awareness of how alive and immediate this moment had become. We exchanged a few more words, playful banter about favorite authors, the absurdity of modern poetry, the charm of finding a hidden gem in a quiet corner of the city. Every laugh, every glance, every small shift in posture was charged in a way that neither of us mentioned, yet both of us felt. It was a slow, almost imperceptible pull, a magnetic curiosity that demanded attention, even if we didn't yet know why. By the time I left the bookstore, I carried her smile with me, the way it lingered, knowing yet mysterious, teasing yet gentle. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that this encounter wasn't random. Something had begun here, something delicate and dangerous in its subtlety, the first thread of a story neither of us could yet name. And deep down, I knew I wanted to find out where it would lead. It started as a coincidence, though in hindsight, it felt like fate nudging us closer. I had left the bookstore, still carrying the warmth of her smile, the memory of her voice teasing at the edges of my thoughts. Outside, rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then heavier, drumming lightly on the sidewalk. I had only an umbrella for myself, and I cursed silently as I scanned for cover. Then she appeared. She was already under a nearby awning, glancing down at her phone, the rain tracing fine lines along her coat. She looked up, and our eyes met again. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to the small square of wet sidewalk between us. She gestured subtly to my umbrella. "I suppose you could share," she said, a small, teasing smirk on her lips, but her eyes held something softer, something almost vulnerable. We moved closer under the same umbrella, and I realized just how small a space could feel intimate. The tip of her shoulder brushed mine, a spark of warmth traveling through the thin fabric of our coats. My arm brushed hers as I adjusted the umbrella, the contact fleeting yet electric. I noticed how her hair carried a faint scent of coffee and something floral, subtle, elegant, lingering in the damp air. We walked in silence for a block, and I became acutely aware of her presence beside me. She didn't speak immediately, but her eyes occasionally met mine, glimmering with amusement or perhaps silent questions. The rhythm of her steps was slightly ahead of mine, Yet we fell into an unspoken synchrony, the gentle sway of our bodies close enough that the other could feel each micro-movement. Finally, she spoke, her voice a soft murmur over the rain. "You seem distracted," she observed, tilting her head slightly, a playful spark in her gaze. "I hope you don't find me intrusive for noticing." "No," I said, my voice barely above the patter of the rain. I wasn't expecting this." She laughed lightly, a sound that made the raindrops and the gray street fade into the background. "Neither was I," she admitted, brushing a stray lock of wet hair behind her ear. Her fingers grazed her neck in a motion so natural yet intimate that I felt a strange tightening in my chest. There was no awkwardness in the silence that followed, only the awareness of each other's presence, the subtle electricity of proximity. Her coat brushed mine, her hand occasionally hovering near mine as if inviting connection without demand. My pulse was quick, and I realized with startling clarity how magnetic this quiet, accidental closeness had become. By the time we parted, her walking into a nearby cafe, me lingering under the umbrella, I was acutely conscious of the brief warmth of her shoulder against mine, the almost imperceptible brush of her fingers. That fleeting intimacy, unspoken and delicate, had awakened a desire to know her beyond this brief encounter, to explore the subtle tension that had already begun to pull us together. The rain had ended, but its echo lingered in my chest, a quiet reminder that the first threads of something more had been woven, simply through proximity, shared space, and a touch that neither of us could forget. The days after that rainy afternoon felt charged, though nothing had yet been explicitly said. I found myself noticing her in small, quiet ways, observing her from a distance, catching glimpses that felt intimate simply because they revealed pieces of her world. It was a Saturday morning when I saw her at the small cafe on the corner, seated by the window with a sketchbook open in front of her. She was hunched slightly over the page, pencil moving with deliberate strokes. I paused just outside, hesitant, unsure whether to interrupt or simply watch from a respectful distance. She looked up, and our eyes met, and for a moment, there was that same spark, recognition without words, acknowledgement of a connection both subtle and undeniable. I slid into the chair across from her, careful not to invade her space. She gave me a small, half smile that softened the stiffness of my nerves. "You're persistent," she said, her tone teasing, yet not unkind. I shrugged, feeling both self-conscious and emboldened. "Curiosity," I said simply. As we talked, I began noticing the little things. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when concentrating, the faint smudge of pencil on her fingers from hours of sketching, the softness in her eyes when she laughed at something private to her imagination. Every small gesture revealed a layer of her personality. Confidence, yes, but also a quietly beautiful vulnerability. I realized I was learning her rhythms, the cadence of her speech, the way her laughter lingered longer than expected. At one point, as I reached across to help her adjust a fallen notebook, our hands brushed. It was brief and almost imperceptible contact, yet it sent a warmth up my arm, a reminder of how alive proximity made me feel. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers lingered near mine, a subtle invitation without saying a word. I noticed my pulse quicken, a quiet but unmistakable signal that something was growing between us. Later, as we shared coffee in companionable silence, I became aware of the details that made her uniquely her. The slight tilt of her head when she was thinking, the way she sipped her drink slowly, savoring it, the gentle sway of her posture as she spoke. Each observation drew me closer, not physically, but emotionally, as if knowing these small truths about her made me more connected, more attentive, more invested. By the time I left the cafe, I felt a quiet ache of anticipation. Not longing in the urgent sense, but a soft, persistent pull, a desire to be near her again, to witness her world in these subtle, unguarded moments. I realized that attraction was no longer just physical. It was the way she existed in her space, The way her presence quietly demanded attention, the way I noticed and cared for the smallest details about her. And somewhere beneath it all, a thought persisted. Perhaps this connection, delicate and unspoken, was the beginning of something far more profound than either of us had expected. It was in the quiet moments that the conflict began to weigh on me. I had grown accustomed to her presence, to the subtle warmth of her laughter, the way she seemed to notice things about me that no one else did. Yet, as our interactions deepened, I became painfully aware of the gap between us. Not just the years, but the life experiences that shaped her confidence and my uncertainty. We found ourselves together one evening at a small gallery opening, the soft hum of conversation around us like a gentle background to our shared bubble. She moved with ease, her hand lightly brushing my arm as she guided me toward a painting she found particularly compelling. That touch, innocent, fleeting, deliberate, sent a shiver down my spine. I realized that I wanted more, but I didn't yet know what form that more could take or whether I dare to seek it. Conversation drifted toward personal territory. She spoke of past relationships with a mixture of wisdom and wistfulness, and I listened, mesmerized by the depth behind her words. Her eyes, steady and observant, occasionally met mine in those moments of vulnerability. It was as if she could sense the internal struggle within me, the excitement, the fear, the hesitation. At one point, she leaned slightly closer, her hand resting briefly on mine as she gestured toward painting. The contact was small, almost incidental, yet I felt it echo in my chest, a quiet resonance I couldn't ignore. I became acutely aware of the tension building between us, not just romantic, but emotional, intellectual, and deeply human. Each glance, each shared smile, each accidental touch magnified the internal tug-of-war within me. I caught myself overthinking every detail. Was she flirting or simply being kind? Did my fascination appear naive? Could someone like her, someone seasoned by life, truly see me as a peer, or would I always be a fleeting curiosity? These thoughts tangled in my mind as we moved from one piece of art to another. Our conversation punctuated by silence and the occasional soft laugh that lingered between us longer than it should. Meanwhile, she was not immune to the tension. I noticed the way her fingers lingered near mine, the way her gaze occasionally softened when she thought I wasn't looking. Her confidence remained intact, but there were small cracks, hesitations that hinted at her own awareness of the risk, the delicate balance between attraction and propriety, desire and restraint. By the time the evening ended, neither of us had crossed any boundaries, yet the air between us felt charged, like static waiting to spark. Walking away, I felt the weight of my own indecision more acutely than ever. I knew I wanted her presence, her attention, her warmth, but I didn't yet know how to ask for it, or whether I even could. And somewhere in the quiet of that night, a thought lingered. Desire, unspoken and hesitant, could be more dangerous than rejection. She had warned me, indirectly, in her smile, that I was dangerous when I didn't know what I wanted. Now, I understood the truth of that statement fully. I was perilously close to losing myself in the orbit of someone whose gravity I could not yet navigate. The mornings had begun to feel quieter, more intimate in a way that surprised me. It wasn't that we were spending every moment together. Far from it. But I found myself noticing the small ways our lives were brushing against each other. The subtle synchronicity of routines, the casual gestures of attention, the way she seemed to inhabit the same spaces I had begun to treasure. It was a Friday evening when I realized just how much she had come to matter. I had been wrestling with a mounting tension at work, deadlines that seemed impossible and responsibilities that felt heavier than I could carry alone. The weight of it pressed on me physically, tightening my shoulders and leaving a restless ache in my chest. She noticed almost immediately. We met at a small cafe, the place quiet except for the low hum of conversation and the clink of cups. She had ordered a hot drink for me without asking, sliding it across the table with a small, teasing smile. "I thought you might need this," she said softly. There was no judgment in her tone, only a quiet acknowledgement, and it carried with it a strange comfort. I watched her as she sat across from me, fingers wrapped around her own mug, and felt a swell of gratitude. The warmth radiating from the ceramic seemed to mirror the warmth she exuded, the subtle steadiness of her presence that made everything feel more manageable. Her gaze was steady, attentive, but not intrusive. She didn't press for details, didn't probe for my worries. She simply was there, and that was enough. Later, as she helped me organize a stack of papers I had brought along, our hands brushed. Again, fleeting, almost accidental, but it lingered long enough for me to feel the spark of connection. There was an unspoken intimacy in these small touches, a reminder that affection didn't need to be loud or dramatic to be meaningful. The gentle pressure of her hand against mine as she adjusted a document, the brief warmth of her shoulder brushing mine as we leaned close to examine a folder. Each moment was a quiet thread weaving us closer together. Between conversations about work or shared laughter at some trivial comment, I began noticing her vulnerabilities. The way she sighed softly when recalling a difficult day, the slight furrow of her brow when she was deeply focused, the small pauses she allowed before speaking when something mattered to her. She wasn't just confident and poised. She was human, layered, complex, and real. And in these moments, I realized that she trusted me enough to let me see these layers, just as I was slowly learning to let her in. By the time we left the cafe, I felt an ache that was both tender and sweet. It wasn't longing in the impatient, urgent sense, but a quiet recognition. This connection, built in moments of care and shared presence, was far more profound than either of us had expected. I understood that the true intimacy, the real, lasting bond, was in these small, deliberate acts of attention, in the spaces between words, in the silence that spoke volumes. And as we parted that evening, our fingers brushing once more in a casual goodbye, I realized that the foundation of what was blossoming between us was no longer just attraction. It was trust. It was subtle affection. It was the delicate, quiet beauty of two people slowly becoming essential to each other's world. The evening was quiet, the city lights glowing softly through the misted windows of the cafe where we had met by chance, or perhaps by some unspoken design. Outside, the street was nearly empty, rain having left the sidewalks slick and reflective, turning ordinary lampposts into golden halos. We sat across from each other in a corner booth, the warm glow of a single lamp casting gentle shadows across her face. I could see the contours of her expression, the softness around her eyes, the faint crease of thought between her brows, and I knew the moment had arrived where restraint would have to meet honesty. We had been talking, lightly at first, about trivial things, books we wanted to read, music we had discovered recently, small observations about the city. But the quiet had grown thick with something unspoken, an electric tension that neither of us could ignore. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the heat in my chest as our proximity reminded me how dangerously close we were in body and in feeling. She leaned slightly forward, her hand brushing the edge of the table near mine. I felt the pull of gravity in that simple gesture, the subtle invitation of presence. "You've been different lately," she said softly, her eyes searching mine, steady yet vulnerable. "I can see it, even when you try not to show it." I swallowed, words tangling in my throat. I wanted to tell her everything, the way my chest tightened when she laughed, the way I noticed the faint scent of her perfume in the most ordinary moments, the quiet ache of anticipation I felt when I knew she was near. But hesitation held me back, the weight of uncertainty pressing against the desire that had grown so slowly, so deliberately. I don't always know what I want," I admitted finally, voice low, almost lost under the quiet hum of the cafe. Her eyes softened, a flicker of knowing passing between us. "But I know I want you, or at least I want this, what we have right now, what we're building." Her lips curved into a small, almost shy smile. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. The contact was gentle, electric, and grounding all at once. "You're dangerous when you don't know what you want," she whispered, repeating her teasing words from our first encounter. but now layered with sincerity, a confession in its own right. We lingered in that moment, letting the words and the silence intertwine. I could feel her heartbeat under my fingertips, slow and steady, reassuring. Our hands intertwined naturally, fingers fitting in a quiet harmony that said more than speech ever could. The hesitation remained, but it was tempered now by mutual understanding and acknowledgement. By the time we left the cafe, walking slowly through the empty, glimmering streets, the tension had shifted. It was no longer anxious or uncertain. It was expectant, warm, and tender. Each glance, each light brush of the hand, carried the promise of connection, the delicate acknowledgement that what we felt was no longer only unspoken desire, but something real, something worth exploring. And in the soft glow of the street lamps, I realized that confession didn't need to be explosive. Sometimes it was in the quiet touches, the lingering looks, and the words spoken with careful honesty that the deepest emotions revealed themselves. The days that followed felt quieter, not in emptiness, but in the comforting rhythm of two lives gradually intertwining. The tension that had once pulsed between us had softened into warmth, a slow-burning fire that didn't need constant stoking. It was in the shared smiles across crowded streets, in the casual brushes of hands, and in the easy laughter that filled even the simplest moments. We met one late afternoon in the park, the sun dipping low, casting a golden glow over the trees and benches. She arrived first, seated on a weathered bench, her posture relaxed yet elegant. When I approached, she looked up, her eyes lighting with that familiar, knowing smile. There was no need for words. The air between us was already rich with the understanding we had built over weeks of quiet attention and shared vulnerability. I sat beside her, close enough for our arms to occasionally brush, feeling the warmth radiating from her. She handed me a cup of tea, and our fingers met briefly as I accepted it. That simple touch, lingering just enough to feel intimate, carried a weight that words could not convey. It spoke of trust, of comfort, of the quiet joy of being seen and accepted. We talked, softly, about everything and nothing, our voices blending with the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the city. Every glance was meaningful, every laugh shared, every pause pregnant with unspoken understanding. I noticed her small gestures, the way she tucked a stray hair behind her ear, the way she shifted slightly to face me fully, the faint tilt of her head as she listened intently. Each movement was an invitation, a reminder of the depth of connection we had nurtured. At one point, I reached gently for her hand, and she intertwined her fingers with mine, the fit natural and comforting. Her head leaned slightly toward my shoulder, resting there with the soft weight of trust. I felt her heartbeat through the gentle press of her hand, steady and reassuring, and I realized how profoundly I had come to care for her, not just for her beauty or her confidence, but for the subtle, human nuances that made her unmistakably herself. We lingered there long after the tea had gone cold, content in the shared silence that no longer felt awkward, but intimate. There was a quiet understanding between us. No rush, no need to force declarations, no fear of boundaries. We had built something that transcended labels, a bond rooted in patience, attentiveness, and mutual respect. As the sun finally sank beneath the horizon, casting long, soft shadows, she looked at me with that same mischievous yet tender smile that had captivated me from the beginning. "I suppose," she said softly, "we both know what we want now." And in that moment, I knew she was right. The hesitation, the uncertainty, the slow unraveling of restraint had led to this perfect balance. A connection that was as safe as it was exhilarating, as tender as it was real. We walked from the park hand in hand, the warmth of our joined fingers a quiet promise that this was only the beginning of a shared journey built on trust, affection, and the slow, deliberate unfolding of something rare and beautiful.